Welcome, welcome everyone. It's Wendy Trevarthen here for Your Nurse Voice Matters, and I'm super excited today. I've got the lovely John Rosenberg with me. Hi, John.
Hi, Wendy.
John, it's great to have you here, and thank you for taking time out into your day. And we were just talking about backgrounds. I've got the very sort of green screen happening there, but you've got a bit of local stuff going on behind you. Can you tell us
Yeah,
about
I
that?
do. Yeah, no, this is the Shorncliffe Jetty, or is it the Sandgate Pier? Anyway, it's a beautiful sunset, or maybe sunrise there, taken by a local photographer, and it's just a beautiful part of the world to live in.
It is. We enjoy walking the waterfronts together. And of course, Sandgate
Mm.
Parkrun, which is how I got to know you quite well
Yeah.
over the last years. But our viewers don't know you. So let me just take a moment to introduce you to our viewers and also our listeners. So, John Rosenberg grew up in country Victoria and trained as a registered nurse at Wangaratta and District Based Hospital in the early 1980s. He eventually settled in Brisbane, where he was a community palliative care nurse until moving into the life of a nursing academic in the early 2000s. John was awarded a PhD in 2007 for an innovative study applying health promotion approaches to palliative care. John currently works as a senior lecturer at the University of the Sunshine Coast, recently gone part-time. He is the current president of Public Health Palliative Care International and a global association promoting approaches to caregiving, dying, and grief that engage the whole communities in providing care and support. John is married to the beautiful Karen and is father to Lucy. He's a DIY tragic, which I've seen. He's
Yes.
usually found wandering his suburban oasis in search of a new house and garden projects, even when the old ones aren't quite finished.
Hmm.
Ah,
Nothing's changed.
no. So we have some similarities in our background because I trained, of course, in Shepparton at the beautiful
Yep.
Goulburn Valley Base Hospital, and you trained in Wangaratta. So a little bit of a
Mm.
parallel, but you kind of went from clinical into research. So, John, thank you again for coming in and, extensive background in palliative care and research. And that's where
Mm.
our commonality, excuse me, came into be because we got our heads talking and realised that we did have a common area in our nursing career. But one of the things that you wrote about in the chapter in my second book and the first of the Dear Nurse Me series was a trilogy of C's, and one of which was
Mm.
around compassion. And it just evoked me, the way that you wrote that chapter, first of all, was profound and, really, contributed to that book exceptionally. And compassion in nursing is one of the keystones or key marks that all of us have. But what I want to ask you from a personal level, what does compassion in nursing mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. I think the starting point with any conversation about compassion in nursing is firstly that it's a strength and that it requires strength and courage. We have this kind of slightly skewed view of what compassion is, and that somehow it's all soft and fluffy, and it's about being nice, and that's kind of it. But compassion is actually, I think it's one of the most challenging things about life generally, let alone nursing, and certainly in those areas of nursing like palliative care where I've worked, where that idea of walking alongside and supporting and advocating for the health and well-being of somebody else, particularly somebody who's vulnerable because of their illness or injury, like that's a critical. It's not just a skill; it's like a disposition. And we have these debates all the time. Is
Mm.
compassion something that you learn or that you have, or what is it? And I don't know. I think that there are people who are naturally predisposed to that kind of interaction with others, but I also think that it is something that can be drawn out and developed in people.
Mm.
To be strong in compassion requires careful thinking, careful consideration, and actually putting things in place so that it can happen. So feeling for people
Mm.
is not a complete picture of what compassion is.
Mm.
So that's the kind of the angle that I take when I think about and talk about compassion, that it actually requires me or you to stand your ground. Um, yeah, so they're the sorts of things that come up for me when I think about compassion.
Mm.
It also relates a bit to some of the work that you mentioned in my introduction with health promoting palliative care and public health palliative care. I've actually finished my term as president of Public Health Palliative Care International, but the work goes on and drives what I do. But we can talk a bit more about that in a minute.
Mm, sure. It's an ethos, isn't it? It's your own giving of yourself to connect with that person or the family to provide that safety.
It is that.
Yes.
Yeah, and ethos is probably a good word because that's a word that not just talks about how we feel, but how we think and how we act towards others. And in nursing, we are encountering people often at their most vulnerable. In my work in palliative care, of course, that's both in people who are dying, but also their caregivers and family who are vulnerable, and then in grief, there's vulnerability in grief. So certainly human kindness is not lost in any of our interactions with one another, whether it's in a professional setting or personal. Um, but we need to also think about how do I act as a healthcare professional, as a nurse, in a way that not just embodies compassion, but actually enables it. And that's where structures or structural approaches to compassion become important. So you perhaps might have heard of compassionate communities,
Mm.
and compassionate communities sits within the public health palliative care approach, which actually says there are things that we can do in our healthcare system, there are things that we can do in our nursing profession that actually put compassionate action into place so that we can actually do this companioning and being alongside and advocating for people.
Mm. You and I have both looked after nursing students,
Mm.
early in their career, and they're so focused on getting everything right. Which is great, which is their enthusiasm is, palpable. How would you advise a nursing student to complement their skills and their knowledge with compassion?
This is an interesting one because um, you can teach and you can learn skills. This is how you do something. You break it down into manageable steps and you take people through and they practice and they get better at it, and that's great. Attitudes and values, I think, are harder to teach. However, one of the things that I always talk to my students about is that at the center of what we do is a therapeutic relationship. It's not the same as being friends with your patients. It's not the same as involving yourself in their lives so much that you're as impacted as they are or their families are by what's happening. But it's an interpersonal interaction. That's what nursing is, and the quality of that interaction and the outcomes are better when we understand ourselves in our profession as being connected to people.
Mm.
And again, that takes strength, because we know that when people are vulnerable, they aren't necessarily withdrawn. They can be very aggressive or very fearful, and they can project a lot of that out towards the nearest person, who is usually the nurse, because we've got this 24-hour kind of engagement with people. So I always try to talk to my students about that, to say this is an interaction between two people. And so the skills that you have, the knowledge that you have, applies to that interaction. You know, it's the question, what's it for? Well, what's it for? Well, it's for the betterment of a person, and whether they are injured, whether they are suffering an episode of mental illness, whether they have had surgery, whether they've got complex medical needs, whether they're nearing the end of their life, that interaction is still at the center of that. And the quality of that interaction will change the outcome for those people in our care and those that matter to them.
I often talk about taking the 15 minutes, invest that 15 minutes in, and you use the word too, which is another pillar in your chapter, connection.
Yeah.
To build that connection and trust, and then the compassion will flow in from that. But if you spend that 10 or 15 minutes while you're doing a blood pressure, while you're looking at some other assessment skill to develop that rapport, that that connection is an investment for you and your team into the future, because you're making that patient so much more relaxed and open to whatever's coming after that period of time.
Yeah, I talk a lot about vulnerability, Wendy, and I think if any of us has ever been a patient, we're really, I mean, sometimes literally putting our lives into the hands of others. And so, of course, there has to be trust there. And trust doesn't happen automatically necessarily. Okay, so there you go. That's
For
that's
a
that
variety of
point.
reasons. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that. It was a bit hot and heavy for the first kind of section of this,
Let
wasn't it? Nah, that's fine.
get in first and go deep. Yep.
Yeah, that's it. All right. So let's talk about like we've both had a pretty long career, number of years. What
Yes,
has
that's why the
been
hair's this color. Yep.
that's right. I'm fast gaining, traction there. What has been the highlight of your career? If you can talk to us a little bit about, what sort of stands out for you.
Yeah, I guess it relates to what we've been talking about, because to actually pinpoint a single incident or event is hard. I've thought of one that actually does kind of capture what has been most meaningful in the work that I've done. And so, as a community palliative care nurse, I was looking after an older man who was very near the end of his life. He was at home with his wife, and their adult daughters were helping with his care. And over a couple of months, I guess I was their most frequent visitor from the nursing service that I worked for. And as expected, this man died, and I was the nurse who happened to be on call, so I went to their home, and we did the care that follows death. And I invited the daughters to participate in that, and we got to the end of it, and he looked good, and he was dressed in a way that gave him dignity, and they were a family of faith, so they said some prayers around the bedside. And as I'm leaving that house, one of the daughters said to me, "I never knew it could be like this. I thought it would be awful, and it hasn't been." And they also sent me a card, and I've still got it, and it's, many decades later, but they sent me a card, and it said, "John, if you ever doubt your place in palliative care, please remember Dad and us."
Mm.
And that's, as a highlight, it's obviously very validating, but it's also indicative of how meaningful good care, good palliative care, compassionate palliative care
Mm.
can be.
Mm.
And I would hazard a guess to say that if that was applied in any number of our nursing interactions with patients and families, they can come away saying, that was easier than I thought it would be. I didn't think that that would go well, and it's gone well. Or even that was an awful experience, but that nurse, at least put us at ease or gave us the information we needed. So
Mm.
my highlights, I guess, are always around how meaningful my interactions can be. The other thing that's really kind of maybe segues into what we're going to talk about next
Mm.
is that I actually don't need to know all of the ways in which I have impacted in that way with people.
Mm.
It's ripples in the pool. I think if there's integrity as a nurse in the moment that we're interacting with someone, um, that benefit can carry on, and I don't need to know about it. I find out about it from time to time,
Mm.
and that I think is representative of a broader impact or a broader legacy. That's very fulfilling for me, very
Mm.
satisfying as I come to my kind of pre-retirement period in my life. I can look back and say, yeah, look, I probably, did some good things along the way, and some of it I'll never know,
Mm.
and that's
It's
okay.
the key word there is legacy, isn't it? That you've actually left something behind where others can benefit from, others can learn from, and walking away knowing that you have been a part of a big picture is something
That's
is
right. I
really
mean,
important.
I'm a little piece in a great big jigsaw of a person's life. And that's the bit I can do. I don't, I worry about people who need legacies that are kind of, sort of massive and world changing. There are those people around, and I'm glad for that when it's a positive thing.
Mm.
Um, but my contribution, I guess I'll speak just for myself, my contribution has been just a moment in the lives of people, a very important moment,
Mm.
but just a moment. It's not normal for people to be in hospital. It's not normal for people um, to die at home. And I say normal, I guess I mean usual. This isn't. If people think about what's my daily life look like, well, dying slowly at home isn't one of them that they think about, and yet people do. And if I can be part of that experience and make a death a better one, and make caregiving less burdensome, and make grieving a little uh, kinder, then that's good.
Mm.
That's
That,
good.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. And as you said, a segue into this next section is I'm going to ask you, like, we learn from our lessons
Mm.
and we learn from our challenges, but what is one of the thing within nursing, if you could change, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to see changed?
About my own experience,
I
or
think
about nursing more generally.
nursing generally at the moment, as it stands at the moment. Mm.
Yeah. There's a temptation to go down the whole should nurses be university or hospital trained. And
Mm.
as somebody who spent most of his working life outside of hospitals, I have first-hand experience as well as working as a university lecturer. You know, helping nurses understand that there are lots of places where nursing care is given, and hospital is one of them and probably the main one, but there's lots of other different ways. My personal opinion, and this is not representative of, my employer, is that I think a 4-year degree with the more internship hours would perhaps give graduates from nursing more work readiness than many of them currently have. However, my response to that will come in my last comment that I know you're going to ask me.
Mm.
I think that I would like to see nursing as a profession filled with people who are always on the front foot.
Mm.
They're proactive.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking responsibility for and accountability for their curiosity, their learning, their advancement, so that it's not just a kind of a passive kind of getting carried along by this great big system we call healthcare,
Mm.
but that every nurse, whether it's the notebook in the pocket or whatever it is, says, I don't know very much about the person or that person's illness or injury or ailment or behavior or whatever it is. So I'm going to find out more. And so there's that constant curiosity that drives us as a profession. And it doesn't have to just be just constant, push, push, push.
Mm.
But I think that being proactive and always being the one who says, this is my career, this is my nursing, and I'm going to take charge of the sort of nurse I am.
Beautiful response, John. I know I think in parallel, and my perception is I've always advocated for a blend of university and clinical experience as a form of training. I like your idea of 4 years. I think that would certainly make that transition to being an empowered registered nurse a lot smoother rather
Yeah,
than jumping in and the expectations being beyond them. And
yeah, yeah.
no, that is a really great concept. Let's hope someone out there might be listening. Maybe, who
Fingers
knows?
crossed.
All right. And last but not least, and I've been asking all of the nurses in this series, and I'll continue to do so because I think this is the gold nugget. What is the one piece of advice that you would give this new nurse that's starting out on the floor or in the community or even in palliative care? What's one key tip that you would like to impart to them?
This should be no surprise, given what we've been talking about,
Mm.
and that is simply this message. Remember who you're there for. So, yes, this is a career. Yes, this is a profession, and there is advancement and opportunity, and all of those things are great. You can travel the world, you can work in all sorts of different settings, you can have such a positive impact on people's lives because that's actually what it's all for. It's for the person or people in front of you
Mm.
that you're providing care for. And if you find yourself being one step or more removed from that coalface care, it's still about the person who is, we call the patient or the client or the consumer. We're there for them. And again, this is not some sort of, sappy sentimentalism. We are actually in this person's life at a particular moment in their life story, and we can make all the difference in the world to what that experience is like. So we need to remember who we're there for.
Mm. Yes, totally agree. Well, John, thank you so much for sharing your wise tips and definitely leaving a legacy within the podcast of Your Nurse Voice Matters. It's been a privilege talking with you today, And also like working with you on the book and the
Mm.
contribution that you made, not only to the second one, but also to the third one. You did the forward in the transitions
Yeah.
book for me. So always a privilege. I learn a lot when I speak to you, and I love talking about the commonalities that we share about this profession. 36 years for me, and I reflect constantly on that and what I've learned. And every time I think about it, something new comes up, as it has for me over this last week, really honing in on that compassion theme. So, John,
It's a
once
pleasure.
again, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Wendy. It's always good to talk with you and to work with you on these projects, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank
Thank
you.
you, John. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. You've been listening to Your Nurse Voice Matters. We will talk and see you on the next episode.